In the year 1872, Queen Victoria wrote down with her own hand some reminiscences of her early childhood, the manuscript of which is preserved at Windsor and which may be quoted here. My earliest recollections are connected with Kensington Palace, where I can remember crawling on a yellow carpet spread out for that purpose, and being told that if I cried and was naughty, my uncle Sussex would hear me and punish me, for which reason I always screamed when I saw him. I had a great horror of bishops on account of their wigs and aprons, but recollect this being partially got over in the case of the then Bishop of Salisbury, Dr. Fisher, by his kneeling down and letting me play with his badge of Chancellor of the Order of the Garter. With another bishop, however, the persuasion of showing him my pretty shoes was of no use. Clermont remains as the brightest epoch of my otherwise rather melancholy childhood, where to be under the roof of that beloved uncle, to listen to some music in the hall when there were dinner parties, and to go and see dear old Louis, beloved and respected by all who knew her, and who doted on the little princess who was too much an idol in the house. This dear old lady was visited by everyone, and was the only really devoted attendants of the poor princess, whose governesses paid little real attention to her, and who never left her and was with her when she died. I used to ride a donkey given me by my uncle, the Duke of York, who was very kind to me. I remember him well, tall, rather large, very kind but extremely shy. He always gave me beautiful presents. The last time I saw him was at Mr. Greenwood's house, when he was already very ill, and he had Punch and Judy in the garden for me. To Ramsgate we used to go frequently in the summer, and I remember living at Townley House and going there by steamer. Since mother was very unwell, dear Uncle Leopold went with us. To Tunbridge Wells we also went, living at a house called Mount Pleasant, now a hotel. Many pleasant days were spent here, and the return to Kensington in October or November was generally a day of tears. I was brought up very simply, never had a room to myself till I was nearly grown up, always slept in my mother's room till I came to the throne. At Clermont, and in the small houses at the bathing places, I sat and took my lessons in my governess's bedroom. I was not fond of learning as a little child, and baffled every attempt to teach me my letters up to 5 years old, when I consented to learn them by their being written down before me. I remember going to Carlton House when George IV lived there as quite a little child before a dinner the king gave. The Duchess of Cambridge and my 2 cousins, George and Augusta, were there. My aunt, the Queen of Wittenberg, Princess Royale, came over in the year 1826, I think, and I remember perfectly well seeing her drive through the park in the king's carriage, in a cap and evening dress, my aunt sitting opposite to her, also in evening attire. She had adopted all the German fashions and spoke broken English, and had not been in England for many, many years. But she was very kind and good-humoured, but very large and unwieldy. In the year 1826, I think, George IV asked my mother, my sister, and me down to Windsor for the first time. He had been on bad terms with my poor father when he died, and took hardly any notice of the poor widow and little fatherless girl, who were so poor at the time of his death that they could not have travelled back to Kensington Palace had it not been for the kind assistance of my dear uncle, Prince Leopold. We went to Cumberland Lodge, the king living at the Royal Lodge. Aunt Gloucester was there at the same time. When we arrived at the Royal Lodge, and the king took me by the hand, saying, "Give me your little paw." He was very large and gauty, but with a wonderful dignity and charm of manner. He wore the wig which was so much worn in those days. Then he said he would give me something for me to wear, and that was his picture set in diamonds, which was worn by the princesses as an order to a blue ribbon on the left shoulder. I was very proud of this, and Lady Conyngham pinned it on my shoulder. None of the royal family or general visitors lived at the Royal Lodge, but only the Conyngham family. Lady Maria Conyngham, then quite young, and Lord Graves were desired to make me for a drive to amuse me. I went with them, and Baroness Lazen, my governess, in a pony carriage with 4 grey ponies like my own, and was driven about the park and taken to Sandpit Gate. Then we went, I think the next day, to Virginia Water, and met the king in his phaeton, in which he was driving the Duchess of Gloucester, and he said, "Pop her in," and I was lifted in and placed between him and Aunt Gloucester, who held me round the waist. Mother was very much frightened. I was greatly pleased, and remember that I looked with great respect at the scarlet liveries. We drove round the nicest part of Virginia Water and stopped at the fishing temple. Here there was a large barge, and everyone went on board and fished, while a band played in another. There were numbers of great people there, amongst whom was the last Duke of Dorset, then Master of the Horse. The king paid great attention to my sister, and some people fancied he might marry her. She was very lovely then, about 18, and had charming manners, about which the king was extremely particular. I afterwards went with Baroness Lazen and Lady Maria to the page Whiting's cottage. Whiting had been at one time in my father's service. He lived where Mr. Walsh now does, in the small cottage close by, and here I had some fruit and amused myself by cramming one of Whiting's children, a little girl, with peaches. I came after dinner to hear the band play in the conservatory, which is still standing and which was lit up by coloured lamps, the king and royal family sitting in a corner of the large saloon. On the second visit, I think, the following year, also in the summer, there was a great encampment of tents, and which were quite like a house, made into different compartments. It rained dreadfully on this occasion, I well remember. We lived in a very simple, plain manner. Breakfast was at 8:30, luncheon at 1:30, dinner at 7, to which I came generally when it was no regular large dinner party, eating my bread and milk out of a small silver basin. Tea was only allowed as a great treat in later years, of course. In 1826, I think, my dear grandmother came to Clermont in the summer. Mother and my sister went on part of the way to meet her, and Uncle Leopold, I think, had been to fetch her as far as Dover. I remember the excitement and anxiety I was in at this event, going down the great flight of steps to meet her, when she got out of the carriage, and hearing her say, when she sat down in her room and fixed her fine clear blue eyes on her little granddaughter, whom she called in her letters the flower of May, which means a fine child. She was very clever and adored by her children, but especially by her sons. She was a good deal bent, and walked with a stick, and frequently with her hands on her back. She took long drives in an open carriage, and I was frequently sent out with her, which I am sorry to confess I did not like, as like most children of that age, I preferred running about. She was excessively kind to children, but could not bear naughty ones, and I shall never forget her coming into the room when I had been crying and being naughty at my lessons, from the next room where she had been with mother, and scolding me severely, which had a very salutary effect. In November, I think, or it may have been at the end of October, she left, taking my sister with her back to Coburg. I was very ill at that time of dysentery, which illness increased to an alarming degree. Many children died of it in the village of Esher. The doctor lost his head, having lost his own child from it, and almost every doctor in London was away. Mr. Blackden came down and showed much energy on the occasion. I recovered, and remember well being very cross and screaming dreadfully at having to wear, for a time, flannel next my skin. Up to my 5th year, I had been very much indulged by everyone, and said pretty well, all at defiance. The old Baroness, the devoted lady of my mother, my nurse Mrs. Brock, dear old Mrs. Louis, all worshipped the poor little fatherless child, whose future then was still very uncertain. At 5 years old, Miss Leeson was placed about me, and though she was most kind, she was very firm, and I had a proper respect for her. I was naturally very passionate, but always most contrite afterwards. I was taught from the first to beg my maid's pardon for any naughtiness or rudeness towards her, a feeling I have ever retained, and think everyone should own their fault in a kind way to anyone, be he or she the lowest, if one has been rude to or injured them by word or deed, especially those below you. People will readily forget an insult or an injury when others own their fault, and express sorrow or regret at what they have done. The end.